Your Amazon delivery gets on time a little bit right before Christmas because one less car is on the road at 8 a.m. in the morning.
Randall Bryant is a political strategist with nearly 15 years of experience shaping public policy, electoral campaigns, and grassroots movements across North Texas. He has led and supported winning efforts from local initiatives to congressional races, building deep networks across every level of government.
Youngest chairman of the board for Dart Rail.
Our responsibility is to represent the voices of those that don't even know the deal table or any table exists because they're living life.
Today, as board chair of DART and chairman of the Dallas County Health Facilities Development Corporation, Randall operates at the center of public infrastructure and policy decision-making. As the founder of Politics United Marketing, he helps organizations and leaders navigate the complex intersection of politics, business, and government.
You've got 13 cities, you've got a $1.6 billion regional transit system. They have a cost and they relate that cost to the traffic that they're generating. So how many people in my community are getting on DART? Is it that simple?
It could be. It could be. The trees that we plant today will never enjoy the shade for. They're for other people. They are dependent on people like me and others to represent them as well as all of the decisions that I make.
Randall, thank you so much for being here. Youngest chairman of the board for Dart Rail. In doing research for this, though, what I find more fascinating than being the youngest is you've only been on the board for a year and a half.
About almost 2 years now.
Almost 2 years, yeah.
Now.
So it's like, how do you go from like jumping in on the board to, hey, we're elevating you to the head honcho?
With very little transportation experience even coming into it. I think giving back to the community that I was born in, raised in, and that gave me an opportunity was always something very important to me. DART, I'm an appointee by the city of Dallas to a 15-member board. That appointment is now, or this appointment is now my fifth by the city of Dallas to any board or commission over the past 15 years. The most prestigious one, I would say, up until this point. So coming into it, there has been a lot of talk about DART and issues raised over the past 5 or 6 years. So a lot of the things that were challenging to DART, even at this moment, there was some general knowledge of, but I have, at that point, 2 years ago, no transportation experience, no transit experience, just a love for the community. And there was kind of like some real inner workings that happened at DART where there was a vacancy of the vice chair. It had to have a new appointment. I was offered up by our Dallas board members to replace that individual. And then in October of last year, October 28th, the new election for a new chair took place. And the board members elected me as our next chair. And then the very next day, life as we knew it kind of changed abruptly. And so it kind of laid the story or the foundation for a great story. And we've, came out of it a lot better in my opinion, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
And then obviously you get named, and then like you said, 24 hours later, the fan has hitteth. And it's just like, you're having to deal with all these politics. So it's almost like the people that put you up almost knew that they were in for a political fight, and they got somebody who has more of a political background than a mass transit background.
Sure. Again, some of the concerns that we had heard from our cities, even in the legislature 2 years ago, the consistent themes we were very aware of, what the concerns from the cities were. I don't think we knew it would kind of get elevated and accelerated to a place where you have 120 days almost to determine if we are going to sustain ourselves as a 13 city organization, or if we potentially lose 30% of our revenue and service. And so I think that, I don't know if anyone necessarily knew that we would face the next day the way that we did, but I think there was some basic levels of understanding that, hey, we're in a bit of a situation that we want to get out of. And even before the next day, the 29th, so to speak, when the city started making those calls to me, the day before, I made it very clear that I was up to the challenge and wanted to work with our cities and our board and our stakeholders to try to create some levels of reforms, even without the elections themselves. And so that was always a commitment of mine. it obviously got accelerated a little bit. But hey, I think we were able to come up with some solutions that work for just about all of our cities, and happy that it worked for the better of the organization.
So can you lay out the fundamental issues? I've just read an overview.
Yep.
You've got 13 cities. You've got a $1.6 billion regional transit system. Was the fundamental issue for these 13 cities that they have a cost and they relate that cost to the traffic that they're generating? So how many people in my community are getting on DART? Is it that simple?
It could be.
It could be. You wish it were that simple.
Right. But sometimes it's like even with a thesis, something so simple in a question could have varying layers to the complexity of the answer, right? I think that DART was created and established a little over 4 decades ago. Life as we knew then is completely different as we know now. I tell this story all the time. I grew up on the DART system. I was 10, 11, 12 years old and riding the entire span of our light rail system at the time from North Dallas to Oak Cliff. At a adolescent age, I have a 14-year-old daughter. There's no way I would think twice in just the world that we live in right now to put her in that same position, right? So just time has changed since then. And so, being that we are a quasi-governmental agency, we're a tax-funded agency, we are established by the state government. Sometimes it's hard for governmental entities to see better ways or new mousetraps, so to speak, right? And that's what our responsibility is as board members and the policy setters of the organization, to ensure that even though we are a public entity and we function from a public perspective, to ensure that we're still building better mousetraps just like the private sector does. So the issues, I think, we've kind of consolidated the things around three pillars: governance, funding, and service. Those were the central themes we were able to kind of aggregate, because it's 13 cities. It's 13 cities with populations from 3,000 to 1.3 million. And so even within those cities, some cities like a Dallas or even Plano, right? East Plano is different from West Plano. North Dallas is different from Southern Dallas, right? So even within the cities themselves, there are different needs for different communities within the cities. And so, I think there are challenges that face different cities, but also challenges within the cities that were different. And so our task as a regional organization is to try to funnel all of the concerns together, as you state, near $1.6, $1.8 billion budget, and deploy services that meet the demands today and in the future, and be planning for the future as well. But so the governance structure, the funding structure, and then the services that we deliver, pretty much the 3 pillars of what the concerns were. I think at this point, we've done a great job of establishing what is now the 3rd governance structure for DART. Because even the one we're currently under was not the original one that was created in 1983. We've been under this current governance structure since 1995. So that has changed a bit. And then the 2nd pillar, which is the funding, we've done a great job of at least creating a backstop, so to speak, or a feeling in the time that we're in, with a plan over the next 6 years to develop something new and something better. And the cities that were calling for withdrawal elections really understand that part of it more so than the lesser amount of money that they were willing to accept in the interim period. And then, those 2 things now in place, the next portion is to kind of redefine some of our services. And there are a lot of new technologies out there. There are a lot of new enhancements that we can make to our current system to ensure that the services that we deliver are going to the places where people want to go. It's done in an efficient manner, it's done in a safe and clean manner, and we need to prioritize our service standards around those needs.
Before we go any further, talking about the 13 cities, like one city is hard enough. Like you take a Dallas City Council, or it's almost like each one has its own little feudal system and they have their own internal politics.
Correct.
And then each city has its own type of hierarchy and political structure and whatnot.
Yep.
How are you, other than the fact that every time we've talked, you're on your way to another city council meeting and another, individual city meeting, like how do you navigate not just one city, but 13 cities, and then getting them, are you just attacking it one at a time, or are you thinking more of like, how do I get all 13 to kind of agree with this system?
Yeah.
Like, how do you navigate that?
You have to kind of do both and, right? I think that DART and a lot of people that either live in Dallas and maybe not travel abroad, or even if they do, don't utilize other transit systems, don't understand that comparative to many other transit systems that we know, MTA in New York, or Boston, or DART has built the second largest light rail system in this country in 40 short years, a little over 4 decades, right? You have systems that are over 100 years old in this country. And within that short period of time, we were able to build one of the largest light rail systems in the country. DFW Airport is the only airport in the country with 2 commuter rail and 1 light rail entry point into the airport, right? When you're in the city and you just see a yellow and blue bus or a yellow and blue train going down the street or the road, you don't really take pride in knowing what we've really built together. So then, kind of beyond what we've built together, it's what's most impactful for the individual residents or the tourists or the visitors in each city. And so that's kind of where you have to get very granular, and because at DART we deliver 5 modes of transportation. Our light rail system, which is world renowned, our commuter rail system, which is now we've opened up our second one with the Silver Line, so that's the Silver Line and the TRE, our buses, our paratransit, and our microtransit, which are like Ubers and Lyfts in small geographical areas. And so that's our full fleet or full range of services that we deliver, and we have to kind of be very methodical in ensuring that the needs of the communities that we serve first, the cities, are being met. But then are there destination stops? Are there health facilities stops that we're ensuring the corridor of jobs are being met, but also the delivery of the patients are being met as well? And where are they coming from, and ensuring that they're coming to a place that makes sense, right? And so that's all of the kind of the full array of the decisions that we have to make. But we have to, kind of do a delicate balance of being a regional player and ensuring that the region is served best, but also drilling down into the services specifically within the city, because just as much as I want to have access to DFW, someone within Highland Park wants to have access solely within Highland Park, right? And so it's a delicate balance that we have to kind of keep up with the growing demands and the changing of the economy and the changing of the job markets and where the future build outs of employment centers are going to be. I think, we thank God we have Walt Humann still around. He's, by all accounts, the father of DART, and created the idea and the system of it. But he was very honest where, we're trying to create a system, number one, that fuels the job economy, the job market of Dallas-Fort Worth, the North Texas region. And it was to, bring white-collar jobs or white-collar employees down to the central business district, and, in the Carrolltons and the Farmers Branches and the Planos, where there were large clusters of industrial and commercial and manufacturing opportunities, to ensure the blue-collar, employees to get there, right? That's the bottom line, or that was the original intent. Of course, we've seen new emerging markets outside of our 13-member base. And unfortunately, just as the state granted us an enabling statute in '83, they've put other opportunities for other cities to grow their tax bases without the need or the requirement to join a transit authority. And so you're seeing these kind of competitive markets between cities that are within transit and cities that are not within transit, and what they allocate their sales taxes towards. And that's kind of almost the fundamental of the funding issue, that, regardless of what services that we do deliver to any city, is that their ability to be more flexible or fungible with their dollars to other non-transit needs that they have, even infrastructure, right? I think a lot of people kind of put the big glow on economics and economic development corporations and community development corporations and things of that nature, but even just aging infrastructure in some of these cities that are mostly landlocked now, and they're trying to figure out how to go vertical and how to, increase capacity in their current infrastructure, and it's aging at the same time. Where can they source those dollars from? And so that's kind of the baseline of the funding, or that was the lens that we were trying to look through the funding solution from is, the cities by and large are asking for 25% of their sales taxes reallocated to them. And that's just at the current levels that are needed to sustain ridership in North Texas and the anticipated growth of North Texas. That much money we were not able to reallocate back, but we did come up with something that kind of met in the middle, in my opinion, and more or less created something in the future that more sales taxes or more dollars could be returned to the cities.
I want to address that, but before we do, I kind of want to just address the social pressures, because it seems like there's people that are extremely passionate pro and extremely passionate against. Mm-hmm. Like personally, I'm friends with you, so I support DART, which is a ridiculous reason to support anything other than loyalty. But I don't really have a strong opinion either way. But to me, it just makes sense. And this is maybe a horrible anecdote or analogy, but it's kind of like, hey, I got married. You go to medical school. I'll go work my rear off, just put you through medical school. You become a doctor, and then you leave me. That kind of feels, I know that's a really bad analogy, but it's like, that seems like some of these cities where it's like, you use DART for the 20, 30, 40 years to develop your economic base. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, now you gentrified and all the people that need DART are further out. Oh, we don't need DART anymore.
Yeah.
Is that a horrible analogy, or is that kind of similar to how I should be thinking?
Well, I think when you started off by saying there are people that are very passionate on both sides.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'll give kind of like three different perspectives of why DART is important and why, even beyond friendship, for someone that is a non-user, an infrequent user, or transit dependent, why DART is important. One, DART is beneficial to everyone in this region, whether they use the system or not, because every bus or train that's on the road, that's one less car on the road. One less car on the road means your ride to work is now one less car of congestion. One less car on the road also means the air quality attainment within this region is one car better, right? So everyone within commerce, your Amazon delivery gets on time a little bit faster right before Christmas because one less car is on the road at 8 a.m. in the morning, okay? So everyone in the North Texas region and beyond.
Just led with that one.
Right.
Amazon delivered, okay.
Yeah. We all have a stake in that.
Right. I mean, that's the catch-all, right? So it's the catch-all, right? Just in case, right? A different opinion, though, World Cup, right? We have all these cities coming to this marketplace. We've attracted, right? We've used the economic driver of North Texas to attract, and we have this great stadium that they're going to go play at. But the individuals from those cities are coming from transit first cities. Maybe they aren't transit dependent, but they use transit first. So they're going to come to our region and be looking for the transit system. Driving, obviously, there's left-handed versus right-handed. There's, all those other complications. But even if they weren't there, they are transit dependent first. And then, really beyond that, it's also there are about 2/3 of our riders are transit dependent, right? And so when you're talking about how does this job market get fueled, those individuals by and large would have no other opportunity to get to work. Therefore, the employers would have no pool of personnel to depend on, right? And so regardless if you are, again, a non-rider, an infrequent rider, or transit dependent, you benefit from this system. And again, it's one that we've all invested a lot of time and money in, and it's been to the benefit. You look at transit-oriented developments at Mockingbird. We're doing a new one at Buckner now. And I think that's also a part of like the what we're calling Transit 2.0. How do we utilize the assets that we have and create economic revenue opportunities for them? And that helps alleviate some of the pressures on our general fund budget year over year as well. So I think we're in kind of the mode that we've built out everything that we desired to build in 1983, so to speak. We still own some right of way beyond our current borders, so we're primed for expansion beyond. But to the original voters in 1983, we've made good on all the promises, especially with the new and final opening of the Silver Line. And now it's like, what does Transit 2.0 look for us? It's a lot of heavy work put into transit-oriented development, number one, for all the reasons of creating more density around our rail stations, increasing ad valorem and sales taxes, which more sales taxes generates more revenues for us. That density, by and large, will put more people on the rail itself. And working through that lens for the next 40 years or so, because most of our commitments on building have been met. We need dollars to sustain those things and operations and maintenance and things like that. But, where do we go from here is the biggest question. And, we've solved some of the governance and the funding things, and that service component is key now.
It seems obvious that a city or a metroplex like Dallas, which I think is on track to be the third largest metroplex in the United States,
Yep.
7.3 million people, has to have a functional transportation system. The devil then is in the details of how it gets funded and,
Sure.
and what are the assets of the system. So we're sitting at the deal table, and it's to Ryan's point earlier, it's kind of hard to imagine how you stepped into a role and you have a 15-member board, and you've got to get consensus on the board on what direction to take, and you've got 13 communities, cities,
Yes.
that you're looking to agree to a complex arrangement for funding. Your board passed the compromise you proposed 14-1. And I think, if I'm up to date, that all but 2 of those 13 communities have agreed.
3.
All but 3.
Yes.
So are there 3 left that still have votes to come?
Yes.
So how does that play out? What if 2 of them agree and 1 doesn't? What is the risk to the system at this point in the process?
Sure. So I love talking about this type of stuff. So state law allows any of our member cities to call for a withdrawal election once every 6 years.
Okay.
So we're in the 6th year of that time frame, right? So where we started in the November, December time frame, there were at that point in time 6 cities. They represented about 650,000 residents and about 33% of our general fund revenue. Based upon the deal, and we can unpack the deal in a second, but based upon the deal that DART offered, the 3 of the largest cities of the 6, that would be Plano, Irving, and Farmers Branch, rescinded their withdrawal election to quote unquote take the deal. The 3 cities that remain are Addison, Highland Park, and University Park. And so state law allows, this process to go through. If the voters elect, just as the voters elected to come into DART, they have the ultimate say-so on, removing their city from DART. If they are successful, state law demands that all services end immediately. And so
you'd continue on the light rail and you'd pass them, but you wouldn't stop.
Correct.
Okay.
And buses as well.
Okay.
I mean, all of our 5 modes of transportation still has the ability and the authority to, if we need to go through their city to continue on our services, we have the free ability to do so. But as you stated, it no longer stops within their city. Things like the circulator at SMU, they no longer exist. That's the employees, that's the students like myself, every other Saturday, taking it from my home downtown up the line to Mockingbird Station and that shuttle, right? So that removes access for people even like myself. I may not depend on it, but if I have the choice, I want to use it, right? So that's kind of the framework of it. So cities are receive services through a membership. They have the opportunity to remove themselves as a member. Services end immediately. We have to then go through kind of a very complex operational effort to either reroute services. The Addison Transit Center in particular is one of our main hubs for the entire system, not the Silver Line component, the bus component. So, within a matter of days or weeks, we have to reroute that entire transit center. And so I think, hopefully the voters see value in our system. I'm, unable to advocate one way or the other on the election itself. But, I think we're going through a process right now of public hearings. That's by federal law that we have to notify everyone, because it's not just the residents of the cities that are going to be impacted. Again, if I need to get to SMU, I'm impacted, right? And so we're going through a public hearing process across all of our member cities to let them know, hey, even though you don't have an opportunity to vote on this, because you may be impacted by it, by federal law, we must inform you of this possible decision or this possible outcome. And so that's kind of the process we're going through right now. And it is a very daunting task. And you don't want to necessarily fear people into it, but it's the reality, and, even in perspective, DART has been here before. In 1983, I believe there were 18 cities actually that called for elections to come into DART. There were 16 that were successful. One, the city of Buckingham, was annexed into Richardson, so then we had 15 cities. But in 1985, 2 cities tried to withdraw, both unsuccessful. In 1989, 8 cities tried to withdraw, 2 were successful, Flower Mound and Capel. In 1996, the year that the light rail actually opened, 6 cities tried to withdraw that year as well. And all of them were unsuccessful. So we've been in this kind of point in time before with our cities where we're trying to convince value of DART, and the councils at that period of time were calling for the voters to have a say-so on the outcome. And so it's not a new place for us. It's an unfortunate place that we continuously, especially going back to where I started with all of the great things that we've built in the midst of city after city after city, multiple times. Some cities have called for this 3 times now to withdraw themselves from DART. And even in the midst of that adversary, we've been able to continue on our path.
In this day and age, though, where we're seemingly more connected than ever, Apple Watch, iPhone, I'm sure there's waves being entered our brains or whatever. But being that we're more connected than ever, we're also more disconnected than we've ever been. So how are you, other than pretend like you're 8 years old and knocking on doors again, and we'll get to that in a second, but how are you getting the message out? How are you projecting that value?
Yeah.
I mean, because was it 2 days ago or a week ago, you were on the cover of Dallas Morning News, but who gets the Dallas Morning News anymore?
Sure.
So 20 years ago.
Right, every morning at 5 a.m.
Old guys.
What's wrong with you?
Old guys still get the newspaper.
If you want to laugh, go watch the Nicole Chambers episode where she repeatedly just calls them old.
She does.
But again, though, 20, 30 years ago, that would be the pinnacle of anybody's career to be on the cover of the Dallas Morning News.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I saw your LinkedIn post, man.
Thanks for the mic, too.
Yeah. No, but my point being is okay, being that there's so much access to get the word out, which means that it's hard to get it out.
Yeah. And so I think I'll kind of approach it a little bit of a different way and kind of tell you some of the things that we are trying to do. So I think to frame it, though, going back to who our core riders are and understanding those individuals. From a post-pandemic perspective, we've recovered about 75% of our pre-pandemic riders. You look at other systems and nothing against them, but it's just the reality of their system right now. Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, in San Francisco, they have not even recovered nearly 50% of their riders, and they are heavily relying on their fares for their general fund, and they're looking for a near $400 million bailout for their system right now. So we've done well against industry standards in a post-COVID recovery system. The last 25% though, and we know that because like our weekend rider is even beyond the 75%, right? And so that last 25% of riders that we have not recovered, by and large, are work from home employees. Okay, so that's why the weekday riders are down for them, but the weekend riders are up for them because they're not transit dependent. They will take transit when it makes sense. So when does it make sense? DFW Airport, right? It's $32 a day to park at DFW Airport. I can take a $6 or $3 there, there and $3 back fare and save on a 4-day trip, $120 something bucks, right? That makes sense. The American Airlines Center, right? $40, $50 for parking, an hour to get in, an hour to get out. That makes sense, right? Everyone loves the fare, right? And so I think we have a lot of destination points currently. The market has other destination points that we don't go to right now. And so I think, number one, a focus on ensuring, especially around the events times, either in the week or in the season, that we are putting a lot of heavy focus on frequencies to those areas. But even beyond that, marketing those opportunities, right? And so, for example, one thing we're doing right now, coming up this weekend actually, is a techno train. And so it's going to be a special train that runs from Plano all the way down to the AAC on a Saturday afternoon. And it's going to be like dueling DJs and strobe lights and fog machines and the whole 9 yards to create some excitement around taking transit, right? For Father's Day, we're looking at doing a Dallas Zoo adventure, right? And so I think we need to, both the cities have a responsibility in this as well, because they have specially curated events solely within their city that we should be driving people to, but also driving people through transit, right? And so I think reducing the stigmas on how safe and secure our system is, and would love to go into some of those numbers as well. But reducing the barriers and the stigmas associated with the system, increasing the marketing and advertising, but then also ensuring that we're going to the places where people that have other options on how to get there would choose mass transit to get there.
And one thing just to touch on, just because as much as probably our audience is mainly Dallas, I want to make sure we future-proof. Like, we were talking about 13 cities. Do we know the economic differences between the high and the low? Does anyone know those numbers off the top of our heads?
Between all 13 cities?
Just like what's the high, what's the low, just to show the diversity of what we're talking about.
Incomes? You're talking about ridership?
Not the rider. I'm talking about the city itself. Because like if we're talking about University Park and Highland Park,
right,
that's a lot different story than like Oak Cliff.
Yeah, it's a very large range, I would imagine, from city to city. But again, the fundamental needs of number one, employment usage are going to be universal.
Universal, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, but I'm just saying in the context of like the what DART is servicing is a very economically diverse landscape.
Oh, absolutely. And again, and that's why that last 25% is so impactful because, I think there is kind of two schools of thought right now. One is, do we create even more opportunities for those that choose transit, whether they are transit dependent or, we have a large, even those that are transit dependent, they're not always economically challenged. Some, like my father, is 90% blind and 100% dependent on DART, right? We have those that have various sensory deficiencies that there's one lady, she lives downtown, very young lady. She speaks quite often, even in Austin and at Dallas. Her father was struck and killed by a car very early in life. And she just cannot gather herself to get behind the wheel of a vehicle and drive. She's a 6-figure earner, but she just cannot come to the reality to get behind the same type of instrument that removed her father from earth. And so we have a wide variety of people that we call transit dependent. They're not always economically challenged. And then beyond that, though, there are those that, like me, when it makes sense. I tell people all the time, they say, do you take transit often? I say, well, I don't take transit as often for the same reason why I don't live in the suburbs, because I don't like sitting for long periods of time. I don't want to sit in traffic for an hour, and I don't want to, if I have the opportunity to take a straight one-seat drive versus a one-seat ride or a two-seat ride on transit to get somewhere, I'm going to choose what interferes with my life the least. And that's the same reason why I don't want to live in the suburbs, right? Because I love the walkability opportunities that I have downtown where I live and work and do most of the things in my life. And so you have to kind of like look at people for where they really are beyond just the economics of it, right? And this is actually the other thing that I was going to bring up earlier, which is you look at like Y'all Street, which I'm sure you all have talked about a lot here. Well, where are those by and large money managers coming from? They're coming from, well, there's going to be an influx of more from New York and more from Chicago. And again, whether you are the Wall Street banker or someone that's an indigent, in New York, everyone takes the system there, right? Most people don't own cars, right? And so we have a lens here in the South and beyond the Northeast where it's looked at as a shameful type of a system where only a certain type of people ride it. But when you're talking about how this economy and how North Texas is going to be shaped in the 2050 framework, where people like me that serve on the Regional Transportation Council, the RTC, and the COG look at this, and this is why TxDOT said last year in a nearly 100-page report, the king of highways said, we need more transit in this state to sustain the growth that we're going to experience, right? Well, I said to them, you can't make a statement like that and not invest in the outcome, right? And so I think right now, and this is going back to where I was at earlier on how we kind of redefine transit for us in Dallas and for our region, but our entire state, is there are a lot of people that are identifying the problem, but what are we going to do for the actual solution, right? And so, there's a lot of different lenses that we have to look at how we deliver our services to, not just to those that are transit dependent, which is a broad spectrum of individuals, but those that as more and more traffic comes and more congestion comes and gas prices increases, those pressures will be on the middle class and then the upper class as well, because congestion hits everyone, right? Whereas gas may affect some at a degree than others. Once it gets to like the Houston levels and the LA levels, the transit system is going to be the only thing left to get people around.
Yeah, I personally think the World Cup here, in a month or two, or whatever time in June,
yeah,
I think is going to be a huge wake-up call to pretty much everybody in Dallas. Just because like that many influx of humans coming to the North Texas region. It's about, oh, that's great for economy. It's like, okay, but my 30-minute commute is now a 90-minute commute.
Correct. So one other point to kind of note is back during the most recent winter storm, DART was the only transit system in North Texas that still fully operated. We ensured, the critical workers were able to get to work each and every day and transported nearly 250,000 people across those 4 or 5 days. And that goes to our core values to ensure that we get the people to the places that they need to go each and every day.
I want to back up a little bit. Thank you. I've learned a lot about DART, and I know that our listeners have as well. I've not been a consumer, although I will say that after paying a parking fee at the airport recently, I thought, well, there is a train that I can take. So I'm inspired now. But there's a reason that you're a 38-year-old chairman of DART, and it's because you had a mother, and I'm sure father as well, but your mother was the youngest president of the Hamilton Park Civic League.
Yes.
I had a mother who was very civically engaged as well that inspired me. And apparently that had a profound influence on you, Ryan mentioned earlier, you were knocking on doors for Ron Kirk's mayoral campaign at age 8.
Yes.
That would be 50. I'm 66, so that would be 58 years ago. I don't have a memory of what I was doing when I was 8 years old. But door to door.
And I didn't have a choice either.
I don't know that I was ever 8.
You might not have the memory. I didn't have a choice.
I may have just skipped to 12 or something. I can remember at age 12 selling personalized Christmas cards door to door. And I didn't get paid. I got to pick gifts out of a catalog that I earned with the points from selling cards. There's something, I think, very transformative about knocking on doors and taking that rejection, though. And so I do think it's a very formative and important thing. But you grew up with a family legacy of civic leadership, and from a very early age, you're knocking on doors. You've been politically active. And then you started your consulting firm at 24 years of age. Can you talk a little bit about what it meant to grow up in a household with that civic engagement and how that's inspired you?
Yeah, I think like top down, it's something that was instilled at a very young age. It was encouraged throughout my early years, and it was supported when I reached adulthood. Watching my mother, watching my grandmother, who's was a very prominent political consultant here in North Texas, watching them up close and afar, right? Because you kind of you read the headlines, like you mentioned, being on the cover of the Dallas Morning News this past Sunday. That's kind of afar, in my opinion. You read headlines, you see them. But then actually when you're very much up close and you see like the struggles and the pains of leading organizations, of, having to make tough decisions, it's very hard. And public service, I always kind of look at it as, the trees that we plant today will never enjoy the shade from them. They're for other people, right? I think this quote was directly in the Dallas Morning News, and it's something that a mentor of mine, former Councilwoman Diane Ragsdale, taught me. It's like, our ability to create policies that affect thousands, if not millions of people, our responsibility within that is to represent the voices of those that don't even know the deal table or any table exists, because they're living life, right? They're dependent on people like me and others to represent them when they don't even know that that meeting is occurring, or that that chamber exists, or that, I'm down there fighting on behalf of them. So it's great to kind of get the moment in the sun and experience a little bit of notoriety behind some of the decisions that you make. But that's not why I get up and do what I do each and every day. It's because there's someone that is just like my father, that is solely depending on their ability to get to work or get to school or get to the gym or get to their doctor's office, is solely dependent on a decision, as well as all of the decisions that I make. And again, that kind of principle was instilled in me through really my entire family. All of my family members, or a quite large majority of my family members, have served the public in a very non-elected official role, because that's just a value of community building that was always taught and supported as well.
Yeah. We're in on the campus of Old Parkland, and Mr. Crow, sort of the patriarch of Old Parkland, has a debate chamber here.
I saw it. It's really nice.
We have political speakers come, and I know that you served on the executive committee of the Texas Democratic Party. One of the interesting aspects of being here is that we have folks from both sides of the political aisle come. Before the last election, we had Colin Allred, who was endorsed and backed by Liz Cheney here in the debate chamber. That was sort of an interesting construct, right?
Yeah.
And I think the next day they had Ted Cruz. And in the meantime, Mr. Crow was an open sponsor of the No Labels Party, seeking to run a Democrat and a Republican.
Right.
I'm relatively new to Texas, 6 years here in Dallas, so I don't know the political landscape like others, but there's talk of Texas becoming a purple state.
Sure.
How do you view that from the seat you're in?
Sure. From the DART perspective, I think it's important to maintain relationships across every aisle, not just Democrats and Republican aisles, the 13 other aisles that present themselves as well. Because, again, I think going back to what the mission of DART is the mission of DART is not to move Democrats or Republicans or independents. The fundamentals of DART are to move people. And that's people, because and that's why we have a sales tax. I don't want to divert, but it's important to make the point land. That's why our revenue system is based on a sales tax model, because it's not only the residents of a city that sustain the growth of our budget. Sales tax hits everyone that participates in commerce in a city. Sales tax doesn't ask you which city you live from or hail from. If you are a tourist, if you are a resident, if you are illegal, it doesn't ask. Sales tax hits us all the exact same, 8.25%. And this is what I try to impart on some of the cities that are looking at withdrawing, or some of the people responsible for withdrawal elections, when they talk about, my sales tax dollars or my tax dollars, right? Well, if I go to Highland Park and I buy a Starbucks coffee, I am contributing to the sales taxes of your city. So I'm also your constituent as far as it goes with who are the people that are contributing to the sales taxes that come to my city that also go to DART, right? We all have a shared responsibility and somewhat of a say-so in those outcomes, because if on the flip side, people that are, as Ryan pointed out earlier, very passionate on both sides, well, if the other side says, okay, well, you take this viewpoint, well, then the campaign should be, don't spend any sales tax dollars in your city, right? Because, or only spend sales taxes in cities that have mass transit or that support mass transit, right? If you are very passionate about mass transit, that's kind of the place where it could move towards. If everyone kind of only has this, very singular view of me, my only city, what's only beneficial for me and my neighbors, right? Which is not why DART was created, and that's why the funding model is not that. But I think though, when we kind of move beyond that lens, that's really where you understand regionalism. That's when you understand, if it's McKinney right now, McKinney is looking to build a new airport or expand their airport to do commercial services, but only the taxpayers of McKinney are footing the bill for it. But everyone in North Collin County is going to benefit from it, right? So where do we kind of start and stop this conversation of only because I put money into it should I be a beneficiary of it, right? And again, everything that DART does, or every toll road that's built, when the efforts are designed to alleviate one thing on the other side of the balance sheet, everyone on that other side benefits from it, whether they directly put into it or didn't. And these are the concepts that we know about water, right? The city of Dallas sells water to a lot of our neighboring cities. Well, we don't look at it as, well, we put the infrastructure dollars in to create the pipes to bring in from all these various lakes, and this is only our water, right? No, it's the region's water. Now, we put the investment into it to create it and sustain it, and we sell it, but we're not looking at other cities and say, go find your own water or create your own infrastructure to deliver the water to your residents. And so it's a very dangerous lens to kind of look at public sources of funds and public delivery of services from a only what am I putting in and versus what am I getting out. Because ultimately the smaller cities and even the growth of the region started from the nucleus of Dallas, and everyone's kind of benefited from it. But now it's like, well, how can I sustain myself without you? It's like, well, we would have never got to this point if it were not for us. And there are a lot of things that, we don't want to really go down that pathway of closing ourselves off to those that are not within the realm of our individual cities.
And to echo the bipartisanship, one of my favorite conversations we've ever had, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so, was we were talking about politics. Because you're a
I think I know where this is
political consultant, and it was I'll paraphrase so I won't get you in trouble.
Clean it up.
No, it wasn't bad, but it was more about like, obviously you have your friends in your political party, but you also have friends in the other political party. And sometimes it's easier being friends with the other political party because in the primaries, you're not fighting with them.
Right.
You know, so you have like in the Democratic fields, like as a consultant, you're always, even though you may be friendly and on the same team or whatever, there's sometimes infighting just because the political nature of it.
Yeah.
And then you got the Republican side, in your case specifically, where you don't have that primary fighting, so you could be friends with them.
Right.
You know, I just thought that was a fascinating kind of like, that makes complete sense, and I wish more people had that mindset.
I think a different way or an alternative way to put it is the more intersections that you have with people, the more opportunities there are to create conflict. And so, you know.
It's much better than what I just said.
And so I think, you know.
It's more succinct anyway.
Yeah, oftentimes, if it's the DART issue, let's call it for that. You know, we even last session fully relied on some Republicans to support DART, and they did, because again, this is not, in my opinion, a left or a right or a liberal or a conservative or a Democrat or Republican issue. You know, I think that there's a platform, and as you've mentioned, you know, I serve on the SDC, I actually serve on the DNC as well. So there are agreed upon platforms within each party. Obviously, transit is one within the Democratic platform. There's no mistake about that. But I think, you know, when you kind of look at the conservative side, you know, what are the things that are most important? You know, there is a business case for DART. There's a business case for transit. I also serve on what's called APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. It's the federal lobby arm for transit in DC. And, you know, it's widely known, every dollar you invest in transit returns $5 back to the local economy. And so you look at a $2 billion Silver Line on the northern boundaries. We fully expect $10 billion to get returned through various, whether that's short or temporary jobs to construct, long-term jobs on the system itself, the economies that are around the stations themselves, and it all recycles back, right? Because when you start building, let's say, ground floor retail, you look at Mockingbird, it's a perfect example. When you create ground floor retail and housing units and commercial units around the actual station itself, it increases the ad valorem taxes, the property taxes, but then we have the retail components, it drives sales taxes as well. And those monies go back to DART, those monies go back to the cities, right? And so there are numerous examples of how to create those successfully. DART has a lot of unused properties on and around our transit stations right now. And so being able to create those economic opportunities to create the business case for those that look through the lens of why or return on investments through that lens, even for public entities. You know, but it's really unfortunate that only mass transit is being looked at through that lens right now, because it's not like we look at, well, what's the dollar return on investment for police when I live in a city that has 60 some odd % of its budget dedicated to public safety, right? Now, of course, whether that's police or fire, a life saved or a structure saved from a fire is beneficial for us, but there is no return on actual dollar from that. There's no return on dollar from a library. There's no return on dollar for a swimming pool. And these are the stakeholders that we have to engage with every day that are asking us, well, what's the return on investment for DART? And, you know, the same question has to be then asked, because if the dollar is not going to DART, it's going back to the city, then it's going to be put into something that's public, right? And so we can't only be looking at DART right now in this moment of dollars and investments and returns on investments from this lens only for DART when nothing else is being looked at from that lens either.
I think one of the most unfortunate things the last 6 months has been, obviously this is a political issue, but thinking that it's a conservative or liberal issue. It's not, to me, it's not a conservative liberal. It's just, yes, it's a political issue that needs to be debated and discussed and thought out. But like I won't say who it was, but earlier today we were at an event this morning where there was a very, very, very successful human saying, "Hey, keep up the good fight." Like obviously I can't, I'm not going to name drop it just because that's inappropriate. But like when someone like that individual is basically endorsing your efforts, to me that says everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, that's all I need to know. So maybe I don't support you because I'm your friend, but because that guy says.
You have another data point now.
Yeah, I have one more data point. Yeah.
Well, I think, this statement can be made in any hat that I wear, and I wear a lot. That's kind of how I got bald. But policy is what happens at the horseshoe, right? We set policies, create policies, amend policies, establish policies every other Tuesday at DART. That's policy work. Politicking or politics is what happens behind closed doors, right? And so, it's a balance because you have to kind of do the technical parts of creating policy, but you also have to have the ability to convince others. I think you mentioned it earlier. How our board structure is, right? And so, a lot of good policies die because there aren't good politics behind it, reaching across the aisle, ensuring that a majority supports the outcome. A lot of politics also fails because it's derived from bad policy, right? And so there's a balance between both of them that good policy setters and politicians have to kind of play when you're trying to ensure outcomes for people that depend on the services.
I want to take us back because we're coming to the end, and I want to go back to the deal that you structured because I know we kind of pivoted away from that. And this is where I hand the reins directly to Lane because he's much smarter on numbers because as an M&A guy, that's what he does. I'm more of the look pretty. It's so funny. Sometimes most of the time I fail miserably. But like I know we pivoted and talked, but like I do think the deal that you struck or are in the process of striking is historic and will be remembered. But it kind of goes back to a conversation we had, which I thought was interesting because as a media guy, as a PR guy, hey, you got to get the world, got to get this. And you had said you told me, yes, getting the word out is important. Getting people on your side is important. But what we really have to do is those closed room conversations because those are the people that ultimately make those decisions.
Yeah.
So I'd like to spend the remainder of this time to kind of go to the deal making process because this is the deal table.
Yeah, I think that may have been actually the hardest challenge was to kind of keep everyone calm, right? The entire world all had an opinion. Everyone had the answer, so to speak, of how to solve the problem. And good people like Ryan had a new idea almost every day.
And he never read it.
But I think
I'm just kidding.
We had to get the policy part right first. And when you kind of look at what's the chicken and what's the egg, in my opinion, the policy part, which is the deal, was the foundation because we can create all types of PR campaigns, but if there's no value sought in what the consideration, so to speak, in a deal, if there was no value sought in it, if there wasn't any amounts of PR that could convince any council to support it. And so how did we get to the deal, right? And I think this goes back to not having a lot of transit experience because I kind of just had a blank journal or a blank whiteboard to start from of, if I could solve the world problems and everyone just fully agree with me, what would be the offer itself? I think going back to the fundamentals of it, going back to House Bill 3187 that was filed by State Representative Matt Shaheen last session, 25% of the reduction in sales taxes, whether it was that bill or some cities that did call for withdrawal elections, sent us, I want to use the term demand letters, but sent us letters of negotiations or letters of considerations for us to look at various terms for them that if we were to agree to them, that they would consider rescinding their elections. And so within all those different letters, within the bill, the most consistent number that we saw of what cities were asking for in return of their sales taxes was 25%. And kind of going back to where I was earlier, that was just a number. And there were different ways to get there. There was a one-time cut of budget to immediately go to 25. There was a escalation of 5% compounded year over year through 5 years to get to 25. And ultimately, that just was not a number that I would ever support. And I was very upfront and honest with them. And, when there was the bill time, we actually worked to defeat the bill. And, in the negotiations with the cities, I've stayed steadfast that I could not support that. I do agree with the theme to try to get to 25. And so what was the deal? And that's kind of where we are now. So I don't know how much information y'all really want, but when we came out of the lead session last summer, we had 7 cities that were advocating for the bill, okay? And it was based upon this Ernst & Young study that happened in 2023, 2024 that showed, it was basically a cost allocation analysis study that showed on operations and infrastructure and depreciation, what was the dollar put in compared to the dollar received in services, okay? And it showed like all these different cities that, some cities were putting in X and getting out Y, right? And so obviously some cities are putting in more than they were getting out and some cities are putting in less than they were getting out. And for some cities, according to the methodology that a lot of people disagreed with, some cities are putting in a heavier amount of money, over double than the amount that they were getting out. And that's kind of was the genesis to the bill, okay? And so what we did at DART when we approved our budget this past September was we said, okay, for the 7 cities, even though we disagree with the methodology, we do agree that there's some imbalance. And just kind of a side note, DART has done this 4 times. DART's returned nearly $500 million of sales taxes to all of our cities over the past 40 years when there's been an inequity of services delivered, right? We've done it quite often on the 4 cities that do not have rail. Right? That's the biggest one that we've always done. And so we've always tried to ensure that the cities were getting let's call it a bang for the buck, regardless if it was dollar in for dollar out. And so for the 7 cities, we allocated 5% of our budget, which was about $42.5 million this year's fiscal year budget back to those 7 cities. And it was called a GMP, or a General Mobility Program. None of the cities actually from September to now actually took us up on that offer, but it was money that we set aside in our budget throughout the entire year for it. So that kind of gave us a baseline of, and it took a lot of service cuts and capital deferments to get the savings built up for it, right? And so because none of the cities took us up on that offer, we had that money still, right? And that was kind of what our thought process was as a board back in the fall months when I became the chair and the city started calling for withdrawal elections, and you have all these different 4A, 4B constraints and compressions that the state is putting on the limitations of growth for all the cities, regardless of this EY study, right? So I want to try to get us out of this year-over-year study that shows winners and losers versus creating a plan that worked universal for all 13 cities, because all 13 cities, regardless of what they're putting in and getting out, are suffering from those other state level concerns. So that was number one. And so what we started with was the 5%. We still had all that money because none of the 7 cities took us up on that offer to create something that worked for all 13 cities. So we basically went from 5% through the next 6 years. It increases 1% year over year through the 6th year to get to 10%. And it's for all 13 cities now at this point. Now, we then graciously begged and pleaded the RTC or the COG to alleviate about 2.5% of that final 10. So basically it goes, for DART it's 5%, then 5.5%, then 6%, then 6.5%. The other half comes from the RTC. And so that's what we call the guaranteed minimum for each city, that they would receive between 5% through year 6 at 10% of their sales taxes back. Okay, so they were asking for 25, and some were asking for 25 up front, some were asking for a compounding effect, but they were asking for 25. The guaranteed minimum that we came up with was 5 up to 10. And we used 6 years as kind of the range because, again, if it doesn't work, we're back into the elections cycle 6 years from now. But that also gives us 3 full sessions to work with, and it gives us, some round numbers to lead up to. So that's the guaranteed pool. And then the other 2 components are, because we're trying to still get to 25%, just not at the expense of DART. The second component is what's called a regional rail system. And this one in particular was an idea that's been worked on almost before I even became a board member. So I kind of stole this idea from the RTC, but it's to kind of bring together all of the regional rail systems in North Texas, which 2 of them are owned by DART, the Tex Rail and the Silver Line. I'm sorry, the TRE and the Silver Line, but also the Tex Rail with Trinity Metro, possibly the A train from DCTA if it's looked upon as that. But we have a bigger issue to solve in other cities that cannot give up a full 1 penny because it's been pledged by voters somewhere else. But they have transit needs, starting with getting around the major parts of the Metroplex. And so if that entity would be created and it's now funded by the state, going back to the state TxDOT can't make irresponsible statements like, we need more transit and not funded. Here's an opportunity to do so, right? And so that would, the capital and operating expenditures from our regional rail system, if it were to be transferred to some other entity that's funded by the state now, would free up about 15% of our budget year over year. And so what we would do is send that money back to the cities as well. We just wouldn't reappropriate it to other non-regional rail services. And then the final component was to be a completely new revenue source. There are a lot of ideas and concepts on this one. The one that I'm supportive of and pushing is a vehicular registration fee for any vehicle that's registered in a city that's not a part of a transit authority. So going back to what I was saying earlier, everyone benefits from our system, but not everyone pays into it, right? Whether you're a user of it or not, you benefit from the system that we have built, okay? And what did not come out, and there were a lot of internal talks and a few private meetings about it, and this didn't come out because the city started with rescinding their elections and weren't impacted by it any longer. But this is like very engineering and technical, but I'll do it for just a second. The TCEQ has what's called a state implementation plan that the light rail is a component of. It's called a TCM, or a transportation control measure. And if the light rail were to go dark based upon covenants the region made with the EPA and TCEQ decades ago to bring the dollars and the infrastructure to build it, the region would suffer from sanctions because we're non-compliant with our statewide implementation plan any longer based upon the rail going dark in those cities, because it does the inverse of what DART does now. It puts cars back on the road, right? And so our ability to achieve air quality attainment, our ability to mitigate traffic congestion is now impacted by all the cars that are now being put on the road in Plano. And so what the possible outcome would have been actual roadway sanctions, or even lane closures, or even like freeway shutdowns in the cities specifically where the light rail system is no longer implemented because of all of this other kind of protections that are, or it's really protections on one hand, but it's also the advantage and the dollars that came to this region because we wanted to build something. And if that thing is no longer in place, the region now suffers from it, right? And so because those things are on the table, only in the cities that are impacted by it, everyone has a responsibility to ensure that our system is well-funded and maintained, because the opposite effect of that could happen, and that affects everyone. Because a lane closure in Plano affects McKinney, it affects Frisco, it affects Melissa, right? Because they're going through Plano. So it's not just for the residents of Plano that are affected by this. It's actually everyone. It goes back to the commerce question again, right? And so because we feel that everyone has some role in the outcome, and because you may use that one in every few times to go to the airport or go to the fair or wherever you may need to travel, you should have some sense of responsibility in the funding mechanism of it. And while we can't force your city to take a referendum vote to pledge your penny to DART, you should have some outcome, some stake in that outcome. And so there are about 7 million vehicles within the COG region. And the other thing, before I go to that point, the COG also receives hundreds of millions of dollars because of the work that—
What's COG?
COG is the Central Council of Governments, the North Central Texas Council of Governments. They are what's called an MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization. They do water, they do, the biggest one though is transportation. And they receive hundreds of millions of dollars every year that gets deployed across the entire region based upon work that only the 3 transit agencies do, right? And so again, other cities, other counties are benefiting from traffic signal improvements and dollars for those programs because of the work that transit authorities are doing, funded only by cities that are members of the transit authorities, right? So everyone has a shared responsibility, and some level of a fee to the registration should be imposed so that those dollars could be put back into the cities that pay for it.
And then a quick follow-up, and this will be my last, and then Lane can take it, and then we can end it. One of the things that, in addition to all that, was the board seat and giving up board seats. What do you think is more impactful in the deal? Was it the getting up to the 10%, or was it like giving up some board seats?
Yeah.
Or is it just, hey, it was work together in tandem?
I think it's the perspective of the city, right? And this goes back to like how complex DART really is, because you have some cities that don't have a full person, so they don't have a full say-so, right? And their economics is in a little bit of a better position than some other cities. And so the governance was, more or less more important than the funding. Some cities have multiple seats on the board, and the funding issues, because they're trying to compete with Frisco's and McKinney's and those prosperous cities. So that was more important. So it depends on which city. This is why we had to kind of do both at the same time, because we're trying to satisfy the needs of a lot of cities that are different needs.
Randall, thank you so much. For someone who's not transit dependent, I didn't know that term. I hadn't thought about that term until you introduced it. I now have a great perspective on the value that I receive for that. Thank you for your civic engagement. Thank you for the time. Sounds like a full-time job. You have another full-time job running Politics United Marketing, and you also have decided that you don't have enough on your plate, so you're getting your MBA
Right.
at SMU.
Right.
So you must have a very high level of energy, and respect and appreciate that. Appreciate you being with us on the deal table today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.